Hello and welcome to this next Flip Preaching video. My name's Andy. We're going to look at the Gospel passage for the Sunday to come, which this time takes us into the new year, into 2021. And the passage is John 1, 10 to 18. And it's such a good one. Such a good passage. This is the kind of second part of the prologue at the start of John's Gospel. It's a strange piece of writing, which doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the book. It's like an introductory chapter, and it's really good. So have a look at it. There's a sheet where I've picked out some things to look at as you're reading through this, and perhaps you want to colour code to help you draw attention to the bits. Okay, so let's go. So it starts off with, in verse 10 and 11, the idea that people didn't accept Jesus. Said Jesus came into the world came into being through him, he made everything, but yet it didn't accept him. There's a sense of trying to set up at the outset the idea that not everybody will get Jesus, not everyone will get Christ and accept him. It's a weird thing. It's an irrational thing that people don't, because he made the whole thing. He gives life and breath to everything, and yet people reject. So John's starting to kind of wrestle with those ideas. And then it sort of talks about how Jesus came into the world. It says the Word became flesh. The incarnation, carne means meat. So the Word became meaty. Jesus became one of us, this eternal Word, the eternal goodness, the eternal communication of God right from the outset, before anything was set into place, came and became a person here on earth, which is, mind-boggling. I want to focus, though, on a few little bits of detail from this, which I think are fascinating. It said the Word became flesh and lived among us in the NRSV translation, and the word "lived" is a word which you can unpack in a really interesting way. The original Greek word is skenosen, uses this word skene, which is the Greek word for a tent. So more literally, it would say the Word became flesh and camped among us. The Word became flesh and lived in a tent among us. It's a temporary, flexible dwelling, and it takes us right back to sort of the days of Exodus, when the Ark of the Covenant was carried around put to bed at night, kind of in a tent in the wilderness. The Hebrew word, I'm not very good at Hebrew, but the Hebrew root word, which has got the letters SKN, which means tent, is very similar to a similar, just one slight change, which means Shekinah, which means the presence of God. So the idea of a tent and the dwelling presence of God amongst us, they're very, very similar, like puns in Hebrew. And the same thing is used in John through the Greek too. So the Word became flesh and lived among us like in a tent. Now, some of the Old Testament bits which are relevant here. In Exodus 25, it says, God said when he said, I want you to make a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. And this is what I want the tabernacle, the tent, to look like. But then there was a promise that God would come back. God would come back and dwell in a tent with people forever. So Joel 3:17, you shall know that I am the Lord your God. I will dwell in Zion, my holy mountain. There's Zechariah, very similar one. I will dwell in your midst. And this word dwell has got that same root, same sort of word, tent, dwelling, sort of same sort of things. In Sirach 24, we get wisdom talking to us. Wisdom, the kind of feminine, creative part of God. And it says, he who created me made my tent to rest and said, let your dwelling be in Jacob. So There was an understanding that wisdom, Sophia, would come and dwell among us. And the same thing's taken up in Revelation. See, the home of God is among mortals. See, the tent of God is among mortals. He will camp with them, is one way of reading Revelation 21:3. So there's a sense that God will come and be among us, but not in a fixed way, in a fluid, flexible, tent-like way. The other word I want to pick out is the word glory. Where are we? So in verse 14, we have seen his glory, the glory as of a father's only son. The word glory comes from again, a Hebrew word, kavod, and it kind of means heaviness originally. The word originally meant heaviness. So there's a sense that some things are heavy, deep, rich, and some things are just flimsy and lightweight. So the glory of the Lord was the sense that this is sacred space, and the world becomes full of God's glory if we can only notice the heaviness. The last thing I want to talk about is the word grace, which crops up again and again. It says that Jesus was full of grace and truth. And grace is a kind of way of meaning that a powerful person is showing love to someone inferior to them. It's an act of love from a high status person to a low status person, or a god to a mortal. Grace is not necessarily so much about forgiving someone when they've done something wrong. It's just an outpouring of love which is undeserved because one of the parties is so much more important than the others. That's what grace is. And Jesus is full of grace. He pours out his truth. In the end of it, it says, I can't find it. There we go. Verse 16, from his fullness. So Jesus' completeness, we have all received grace upon grace. There's a sense that the old ways of doing things, the law brought God's grace to us, but there's a new form of grace which is more gracious, more loving, more giving, and that's what Jesus came to do. So it's quite an abstract passage, but I think this is good news for us because it shows that even today God dwells among us. The world is filled with God's glory. It's heavy, and we just need to have eyes to notice and to see. Okay, so I wonder what you make of this. So a few questions. Why do people not accept Jesus? What are they afraid of losing? Secondly, what do you make of that tent dwelling presence pun? And 3, how do you sense the glory of God? And why is this good news today? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.